Okay, great. Again, assalamu alaikum to everybody. All right, thank you for coming out. New faces. So that's good to see, and don't be discouraged by the number of people that you see here. These particular topics that I discuss are very, in some cases, are very new to us, and in some cases are new, or they're intrusive, and to a certain degree probably a little bit controversial, just because of where we have come from in terms of how we relate to these topics. The name of this overall series is coming from darkness to light, and it's based on a small snippet of an ayat in the Quran, and it's also got a little bit to do with the fact that when a lot of people get honest and become a little bit more open about mental health concerns, obviously it's coming from darkness to light. Of course, we know a lot of celebrities, eventually they talk about something that they dealt with in the past, how they struggle with something of that sort. So it's kind of like relieving a burden to just get it out in the open and not pretend that it doesn't exist. Okay. In the first lecture, I basically introduced myself. I gave my professional background. I'm a licensed chemical dependency counselor, by the way. I'm also now working on my master's in MF&T, so marriage and family therapy. Okay, and also trying to get my certification in a couple other things, such as dealing with sex addicts and sexual trauma. I worked with the victims of molestation and sexual abuse for a number of years, and like I said, dealing with drug dependency issues now, and also other compulsive behaviors. Okay, whether that's cutting, self-harm, and things of that nature. So it's like I've done a lot. Had my hand in a little bit of this and that, and I do a lot of advocacy in addition to it, because obviously when you work for certain agencies and stuff, there are certain things that they don't want you to talk about. There are certain aspects of maybe theosophy or whatever that you cannot include, but that I feel may be necessary, and so I do a lot of advocacy work as well. What was the other one? Oh, personal background. The stuff that I dealt with, not only have I dealt with it from a professional standpoint, I dealt with it in my personal life. The chemical dependency, the sexual molestation, neglect, things of that nature. I've experienced it all. So I'm not just a textbook doing the talking, and we always, in like sobriety groups and stuff today, we always say that, the curse becomes a blessing, that when you finally turn the corner and embrace the things that have happened, then you develop a voice. Allah gives you a voice to be able to talk to people about it, and so that's kind of what I have done, and it became like a method of income and everything else. And then on the spiritual end of it, I told the story of how I came to having my sheikh, who convinced me to start looking, really looking at myself and trying to get help. And I told a funny story about how I was, acting out, and I was on the internet looking at something I probably should have been looking at, and the computer did some funny bunny stuff and just sent me to a completely different website, which was an Islamic website. and that's how I came across the Sheikh, who I still talk to today, who still asks me questions, who still, you know, we go through this whole process, and I listen to all his talks every day, every week, all that stuff, and so it's kind of funny, and at that time, I just to kind of, you know, add a snippet to it is a lot of people who know me and my wife, they're always congratulatory towards us because you know, we have our kids and we've been married for some years, and for a lot of younger people who are Muslim today, unfortunately, they don't have longevity in their marriages. And you know, when I tell the story about how I started to get help for myself, you know, the funny thing is my wife and I were on the verge of divorce at the time. You know, we weren't even speaking. So things really do change, you know. But that's just a real quick introduction. You can, when you see the video, then you'll really hear some stuff. But I tell everybody that because it's always good to know that a person is not a textbook. And for a lot of minorities, when it comes to like mental health related topics, they don't want somebody to speak it. They want to be able to relate to people. When I'm in settings with professionals, they don't want you to share your personal story. They say it gets in the way of treatment. But when I'm with minorities, minorities will not open up unless you share with them, okay? So that's very key, all right? So the first week was that, and talking about a lot of just the perspectives on mental health that we tend to have as Muslims and or as African Americans, to minorities, you know. And I mentioned some studies. You'll be able to see those on the website, some studies that really kind of shed light on where we are in terms of mental health. The second week, I pulled out a lot of hadith from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that dealt with seeking a physician when you needed one. A lot of these hadith are not well known. They don't get advanced by people in the community because it makes us feel uncomfortable. We don't get to hold on to those old thoughts and ideas the way that we want to anymore when we're confronted with those hadiths. Okay, some very interesting stories. Okay, so you'll be able to see those. And then to bring up the speed, last week we had some very good Q&A after the talk and some comments that were not mentioned. They weren't recorded. And so I wanted to mention one question that was asked because it leads into today, what I'm going to talk about today. The question that was asked, one of the questions that was asked was, I'm paraphrasing it, is why won't we get help? Okay, if we know we need help, then why won't we get help? And at the time, my answer was that, well, you know, we have a lot of stuff that we have to talk about if we want to get help. We've got to talk about not only our personal lives, we got to talk about our relationship to dad, or not relationship to dad, relationship to mom, relationship to grandparents, uncles, cousins, aunts, nieces, nephews, that whole gamut. And a lot of people, they just don't want to do that, you know. And especially as we get older, we get used to operating with a certain mentality. We find a way to make it work, even if it doesn't work really well, and so we just stick to that, okay? So that's how I answered it at the time. Now, today, I'm going to give you the full answer as to why we don't get help And if we know we need help, why we don't get help. And in some cases, why we don't even know that we need help. Okay? Now, the other thing I want to say is this isn't just about severe mental illness. Okay? This is about general psychological homeostasis. Okay? So just you're feeling grounded, feeling centered and whole. Okay? So if you hear me say homeostasis again, that's really what that means. Okay? Not being off kilter and stressed out, anxiety ridden. Okay? So it's not just, a lot of people when they hear me speak, they think I'm speaking only about severe mental illness. And that's not the case. Okay? In the Quran, Allah says, indeed Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. I used to hear that a lot. And, I came out of the nation, I was in the nation as a young teenager and then young adult. And that was something that you heard a lot of. But, it just became like slogan. And we got to be honest, there are a lot of people who use the Quran like a slogan, So it didn't really settle well. And then as I started to work on myself, and as I started to work with other people who were dealing with the same issues, I was like, wow, that's not a slogan. And it's not meant to be used as a slogan, okay? It's very, very heavy. And that particular part of the ayah asks us to do something that a lot of us, we really aren't all that comfortable doing. And what I mean to say is that we're really not that comfortable looking into ourselves and making those changes so that then we can petition Allah and say, look, Allah, look, I'm working. I did this. We still some of us anyway, operate like we're waiting for it to happen over there and just to land right here for me without any work, okay? It's funny because not until last night at work did I find a quote, and I prefer not to mention names of people, of the different teachers and scholars and all these people that have come down to us, because I don't like to push certain people away and invite others. But there is a quote that really sits well with what I'm going to discuss today. Okay, the quote says, "There exists a need and desire in the souls of the survivors of slavery, as slaves lost the sense of this responsibility. We will not be comfortable with freedom or satisfied in our souls until we can reflect on the condition of our people and not be saddened by it." Okay? And that particular quote at the time, was directed primarily towards African Americans. But the reality is, when you read it, when you understand the nature of the human soul, then you understand that it's really about everybody, okay? And so I will start. You heard me say the word slavery, but I'm going to kind of add a spin to it. How many of you have heard of mental slavery? Mental slavery. Mental slavery? Anybody? What is it? Yeah, see, we've heard of it, but then we say, what is it? And it, yeah.
Just briefly, it's a mind thought process conditioning where you cannot move outside of this conditioned thought process.
Okay. You know what? And that's very good. Did you? Yes.
A trained way of thinking, a repetitious
Yep.
way of thinking.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. And that's great. And that's exactly as far as we need to take it. Okay? We don't have to get off into the Afrocentric idea and stuff like that right now. What you two said is what I'm going to talk about. Okay? Now, here's a question for you. If you went to a therapist and said, "Hi, doctor, I need you to help me with this mental slavery," what do you think the doctor's going to say to you?
What?
Okay, yeah, what? So half of the therapists are going to look at you and say, "You know what? You probably need some meds," because they're going to think you crazy. And the other therapists are going to say, "Look, you probably need to get out of my office because I got some stuff to do." Okay? A therapist cannot bill an insurance company for talking to you about mental slavery. Okay? Now, how many of you have heard of toxic shame? My wife, she doesn't count. She's got the notes and everything. She doesn't count. But you say you've heard of toxic shame. Okay. All right. Can you give me any kind of?
I would say that it would be something that that a person feels so ashamed of that it doesn't allow them to grow in any kind of way.
Okay, very good. There you go. Now, I want you to think in terms of multi-generational stuff. Okay? And that's a lead-in. All right? So, I found some working definitions of mental slavery, and I'm going to read them to you. It's a bondage that is caused from a lack of understanding ourselves. Okay? It's the inability to view events or oneself differently from commonly held beliefs. Okay? It's crippling to the victims. It makes them ineffective. It paralyzes them. Okay? It's self-destructive, self-hating, and it's very dangerous. It can be a very, very nasty habit. Okay? It involves living by other people's standards. It makes people emotionally dependent and dependent in other ways as well. All right. It also creates a kind of vacuum when we speak about accountability. Okay. It doesn't really make people responsible for their actions. Okay. So that's the definition of mental slavery. Okay. Last week I was talking to some people and I said that we cannot heal what we cannot feel. Okay. And there are a lot of us in that predicament with one thing or another, where we try to avoid feeling. We do anything that we can to avoid feeling. And this is something that obviously people who are chemically dependent, this is their modus operandi. Okay, they don't want to feel what they're about to feel, so they change. Okay, but it also happens to people who don't use drugs. Okay, boredom. What's one of the main things that people do today when they're bored? Watch TV. Okay, play with a cell phone. Okay, they are attempting to alter their mind state. Okay, so it's very, very common. It's our human way. Okay, but we cannot feel what we cannot heal what we cannot feel, and there are some reasons why we go through this. Okay, often it's about denial, suppression, repression, and disassociation. Okay, or dissociation. Okay. A lot of times denial is a problem. It's a very common reason why people don't seek help. Okay. and that's obvious. But it also allows the person to like continue living their life as they would, even if they may not be making the best decisions. That denial just kind of pacifies them. Look, I know I'm not doing well, but I'm okay, so I don't need to change anything. Okay? Person may have been brought up and taught that denial was a way to deal with irrational feelings. Okay? You know, sometimes a person can't always see things objectively, and so there's that denial piece is going to come in again. Now, with repression is like an involuntary way of avoiding things, okay, as opposed to suppression, where the suppression is going to be you attempting to avoid it on purpose. So that would be the person who, when I was speaking about somebody who's chemically dependent, that would be the person who was made to feel very, very awful. They don't like the feeling that came about because of what somebody said about them. They go out and they use drugs. And I always tell people all the time, as much as you want to make a person feel bad for using drugs, don't. Because as soon as you get done beating them over the head, guess what they're going to go out and do? They're going to go use drugs, and they're going to say, you know what, well, since you feel like this about me, I'm going to go use. You see what I'm saying? So it's a really, really tough situation to be in. Okay? Now, disassociation or dissociation, that's a way to fight traumatic recall. Okay? That's more about creating a different identity in a different place at a different time in a different space so that you don't have to deal with this painful reality. And there are people who do this on small levels, and there are people who do it on very, very big levels. There is actually a diagnosis in the DSM that people have that's referred to as DID. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. And if you've never ever seen this before, it can be crazy. Okay? I always like to give people the example of Becky, who you meet in the morning, who's a housewife with 3 kids. She knows your name. In the afternoon, Becky is somebody totally different. Her name is no longer Becky. It's Dorothy. She's a real estate agent. She's never seen you before a day in her life. That really, really happens to people. It is largely the response to severe trauma. So, and it's a trauma that happens very, very early in life for a lot of people. You know, physical abuse to the hilt, war, and things of that sort can bring this about. Okay, so that's the dissociation. Okay, now I wanted to mention those things because now, as I talk about toxic shame, you'll see how they all kind of mesh together to create this huge atomic cloud. Okay, toxic shame is a psycho-interpersonal issue. It's a cognitive behavioral issue. It's an emotional issue and a spiritual problem. And I'll explain that here in a second. Okay, shame is this unrelenting feeling of not being wanted. And I have to say to people, this isn't the kind of shame where, you know, when Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, if the people feel no shame, then do what you want. Okay, that's a shame that's related more to morality and social living conditions. Okay, this particular shame develops out of something else, and we'll go through that. This shame is about always feeling inadequate. Okay, feeling unloved, feeling like instead of you did something bad, you are the bad, okay? And I always tell people, you know how somebody will say, oh, he's an angry person, okay? Or she's a sad person. Now, they have become that thing, that emotion, okay? Instead of them having anger or being sad, they are those things. And that's a result of the toxic shame, okay? Instead of having done something shameful, I am shame. I am shameful, okay? And that's the difference. It becomes an emotion. And that's why I say that, you know, it's also an emotional issue. It's hard for people to disown it. And it's hard for people to disown it because a lot of people don't even know that they have it. Okay? So you heard me say this big word, intrapersonal kind of stuff, right? It's really, really easy to understand. These are thoughts, beliefs, and feelings, attitudes and opinions, perceptions that we have about ourselves versus what the other people think about us, how they feel about us, how they see us, okay? It's a way to defend our ego, okay? When a person battles toxic shame, the stress, you know, that is acted upon them is internalized, okay? We often experience like a schism between the perceived self and the real self, okay? Ideas about moral codes, boundaries, assertions, and expectations, okay? They all come together to either influence us or dissuade us, okay? There's the cognitive piece, okay? Are you familiar with the words cognitive dissonance? You know what that is? Cognitive dissonance is simply having two ideas that are contradictory, okay? The opposite of cognitive dissonance is cognitive consonance, meaning that you have reconciled these two opposing thoughts, feelings, emotions, what have you, okay? In a state of cognitive dissonance, or like, you know, inequilibrium, okay, or disequilibrium, people are going to deal with frustrations, anxieties, guilt, anger, embarrassment, and the list goes on and on and on, okay? The unfortunate part about the cognitive behavioral part is normally our brain is able to compartmentalize things in a healthy fashion. Well, when you succumb to toxic shame, your brain can't do that any longer, okay? So it doesn't make a difference between you did a bad action, you are bad, you just feel awful regardless of that. And I'll use a woman cooking something at the house as an example. She cooks it. She doesn't know how it's going to turn out. She tries it on her husband or family. They don't really like it so much. She feels like everything is a loss. Okay? So it's not, this dish didn't taste the greatest. It's everything that I do is bad. Okay? And if you think about people who you know in your lives, you can come across somebody who you know that experiences that, okay? The emotional part is about, again, like I said, when we internalize these same thoughts over time, just every day, the same thing, okay? It informs you of your unworthiness every day, your dishonor every day, your regret every day. It never, ever leaves you. Okay? And as I said, it can often be confused with guilt. A guilt is something that will eventually say, hey, look, you know what, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, we make amends, that kind of thing. Well, with the toxic shame, I didn't make a mistake. It's just who I am. I'm just this flawed person, accept me. I screw up. I am a screw. Okay? Spiritually speaking, it's huge because it's about spiritual bankruptcy. Okay? Spirituality is about growth and expansion. Toxic shame is about constriction and restriction. Okay? Spirituality is about being. Toxic shame is about, one, not being, and two, if the person is being, then they're being someone else that they've been told that they have to be, okay, for the person's approval, and you'll see that develop. So again, it's about spiritual bankruptcy. Now, I asked about toxic shame. Did I ask anybody here about multi-generational shame? No. What do you think that is? Multi-generational shame.
Is that inherited?
Yes, it is inherited. It is inherited. Now, you heard me say earlier, if you go to the therapist and you say, see me for mental slavery, the therapist is going to say, hey, can't do that. I can't even bill for that. If you go to the therapist and say, I'm battling multi-generational shame, the therapist is going to say, please come in and have a seat. Okay? What I'm really telling you is that the mental slavery that many of us know, that we heard a lot of Afrocentric people speak of, that we've heard people like Imam Muhammad speak of, and other than him speak of, that mental slavery, that is the multi-generational shame. Okay? It is the multi-generational shame. There is no difference. Okay? The only difference is that some people with degrees came up with the word, whereas people who were wearing kente cloth with dreads came up with mental slavery. Well, actually, Marcus Garvey mentioned it first, and then it was kind of, fostered after he mentioned it. In fact, Marcus Garvey said, we're going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. Everybody's familiar with that part. Because while others might be free in the body, others might free the body, none but ourselves can free our minds. Mind is your only ruler and sovereign. The man who is not able to develop and use his mind is bound to be the slave of the other man who uses his mind. Use your intelligence to work things out in life. The time you waste in levity and non-essentials, if you use it properly, you will be able to guarantee a better prosperity, better than you were able to provide for yourself. You'll be able to do more for your prosperity. Okay, so that was from Marcus Garvey. And you hear him addressing this issue. Okay? Again, the question was asked, why aren't we seeking help? We're not seeking help because it's painful. We come from families, and we come from people. We come from a group of people that have always maintained secrets. We've always maintained, my family has secrets, okay? My wife's family has secrets. I'm sure that if you think about your families, you probably got some secrets, you know? I mean, and it's funny because I remember just like a few years back, we went to my family reunion out in St. Louis, and there was this little murmur about somebody in our family who we always thought was a part of our family. I mean, a whole group of people who we thought were related to us directly, they weren't. And it was like, well, but why were we saying they were if they weren't? And it was like, shh, come over here and I'll tell you why. Okay? And what it amounted to was somebody who knew somebody got with somebody, and that somebody broke their leg. Do you all know what that phrase meant? Old folks used to say that meant that somebody got pregnant. Okay? So there's another secret for you right there. Somebody's not expecting or pregnant, They broke their leg, okay, because they wanted to hide that from the kids, okay? So families have secrets, and families are as sick as those secrets, okay? They can be about suicides, homicides, and that's a biggie, okay? Incest, rape, lineage. You just heard me mention that about my family. Abortions, addiction, public loss of faith, financial disaster, poverty, all kinds of things. Now, if you think about minorities, doesn't that fit somewhere? For most of us, it does. It does, okay? All of those secrets get acted out. And if you don't believe me, turn on your news tonight when you go home. Turn on your news tonight when you go home. Pay attention to the stuff that they talk about. And these are people's secrets coming out. Okay? It's contagious. Okay? You said it's inherited. It is indeed contagious. And I'll give you some examples of how this happens. And it's particularly damaging for young children. Okay? When children are emotionally, physically abandoned, okay, abused or neglected by an adult who is supposed to be a caretaker for them, they immediately take on that toxic shame. I want you to think about how many people don't know their fathers right now in our communities. You know, how many people grew up with grandparents because mom was out on the streets and things like that? It's a lot of people. Okay, it's a lot of people. Children begin to behave in ways that make them culpable for the issues of the parents. So the bad behavior that you see a lot of kids do, they say, oh, they're acting out. They're acting out for attention. This is that shame piece that's really, really starting to come out. Parents can experience intense shame because of kids. So it's not just that the kids experience shame because of parents. You know, I have a close friend whose deceased father was he was a drug addict. And I always wondered, how did that impact you? How did that make you feel? You know, he's not too good at talking about his feelings. And one of the reasons why he's not that good at talking about his feelings is because it's too much. It's too much. I find another way to deal with it, you see. But parents can experience this shame too because of the behavior of kids. And I'll give you an example. One of my good friends back out in St. Louis said, hey, you know, a sister came to me and said she was shocked that her daughter was listening to some foul music that had, you know, sexually explicit lyrics in it. And I said, was she really shocked? Said, you and I both know what we were doing as teenagers. It's not new. It's what teenagers do. Okay? It's not that she was shocked. It's that she's ashamed to say, wow, this is really what's happening now. So it's her repression in play right now. And a lot of us do it when our children do something that we don't like. I'll give you an example. Well, my other kids. Learning different body parts. Nose. What do you do when a child comes to you and says, look, my nose, I found my nose. Yay, good job. Right? Ear. Right? Yay, good job. Eye. Yay, good job. What do you do when this little child comes to you and says, hey, Grandma, look what I found? And his pants are down. Do you say, yay, good job? No, you do not. We immediately jump to, hey, you can, no, you're not supposed to do that. Well, guess what you just did to this child? That is one of the first instances of a child being shamed, okay? Because what we often fail to do is we don't explain this in great detail to a child at that time, because obviously the child at that level of development won't be able to understand as much of it as we can. But most times what we tend to do is we let our feelings, thoughts, and emotions about body parts, sex, and everything else come out. Okay? That's kind of how it goes. Sometimes parents develop shame, because we do the best that we can with a child, and it just doesn't work out. This child decides to be lawless, make bad decisions over and again, despite our good efforts. It does happen. It does. And one of the things that I always, always, always hear parents say is, well, I did everything that I could. I did everything that I could. We had little Johnny in soccer. He was doing this with music. He went to camp every year. What the parent is really saying is, I feel so ashamed right now. I'm losing faith because of my child. And one of the things that we do when we know sincerely that the parent has done everything that they could, we reassure the parent that, you know what, you did do everything that you could. But there are also external factors. And as a child gets older, they're going to be exposed to those. Okay? So that does happen. Okay? Now, on the flip side of it, you heard me say some parents they deny any culpability. And they deny that culpability because of the intense remorse that they're dealing with. Okay? Toxic shame is primarily something experienced in significant relationships, family systems. Okay? And it is passed on from one generation to the next. A lot of these people, they either get married to other people who have toxic shame-based family systems, or they have relationships. And I don't really like to say they only have relationships. They never really get married because they don't even know how to be that functional. Okay? Or if they do get married, they experience revolving door marriages. And I want to tell you all that we deal with a lot of younger Muslim couples. Divorce, 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 divorce. And when you start getting into their stuff, when you force them to open up that chest, full of mess, it is indeed full of mess that they've never dealt with before. And you wonder, how did you think that you were going to have a successful marriage when you've repressed, you've suppressed all that stuff from back there, you've read a couple books, heard a couple talks, and thought this is going to work. And so that's why you have a lot of younger Muslims today, when they're talking about getting married, they'll sit there and talk about rights and responsibilities. And me and my wife cannot stand when people do that. Because what you're really talking about, you're talking about something that was supposed to be given to you as a child. And later on down the road, I'll explain that. It's not that you're not supposed to be taken care of in marriage, but what a lot of people are harping on is, in reality, the fact that they've never ever been taken care of before. Okay? It's very, very huge. So these people, they actually seek out each other. And this is a two-part talk. So next week, we'll actually paint a picture of a person, of an entire family that's dealt with this, and it will really, really hit home with a lot of people. Okay? Parents, they model shame. They model it a lot. Okay? But before I talk about the shame that they model, I want to give you 9 things that we should model for our children. And it's so crazy how many people can't name a lot of these. Okay? Number 1, what should we model in healthy parent-child relationships? Number one, how to be a man or a woman. Okay? Number two, how to relate intimately to another person. How to relate intimately to another person. There are women in the room who know that intimate doesn't just pertain to physical stuff. We still working on some of the men to get them to understand that you can even be intimate with your brother. Okay, there's a way to be emotionally connected to your brother. We have to teach people how to do that. Number three, how to acknowledge and express emotions. How to fight fairly. In other words, how to deal with conflict. Okay? How to have physical, emotional, and intellectual boundaries. How to communicate. How to cope and survive life's unending problems. 8, how to be self-disciplined. And 9, how to love oneself and love someone else. Okay? Those are 9 things that when I talk to parents who are having problems with their children, children who are having problems with their parents, they can't name the majority of them. Okay? And one of the reasons why they can't name them is because they're not doing them. I know this sounds very elementary, but it's not happening. Okay? Now, in shame-based relationships, these things are not present. Or if they are present, very, very minutely present. Okay? I want to give you an example of what we see today that creates shame for a lot of families, a lot of children. Driving on the highway, you see the person texting on their phone, trying to drive. They've got little Johnny in the car with them, and Johnny's trying to talk. But the parent is texting, driving, or talking on the phone, and is telling little Johnny, "Hey, Johnny, what do we tell our kids when we're on the phone?" Somebody. Come on. Not you, because you already know. What do we tell our kids when we're on the phone? Be quiet. We tell them, be quiet. It's rude to talk when I'm on the phone talking to somebody. Wait a minute. All that kind of stuff, right? Okay. And we tell them that over and again because you know a child isn't going to get that the first or the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth time. Because, you know, as a parent, you got to love hearing your own voice, right? We tell them that over and over and over and over and over, and they don't get it. And there's a reason why they don't get it. You see? What do they call parents? They call parents primary caretakers. Primary caretakers. We are the first responders for these kids. Okay? But when you tell little Johnny, look, I'm on the phone right now, you got to wait till I get off. You, the primary caretaker, just told Johnny that he's secondary. Okay? And you tell little Johnny that over and over and over again. So Johnny begins to feel and to think and believe that he is secondary. Okay? I use other examples. Guy at home watching the football game. Kids are there. He thinks he's doing a good job. But he's not interacting with the children. You see what I'm saying? And that's a huge deal. See, even I like football, you know. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Let me take time out from this because they're over there coloring and we're here, but we're not doing anything. You see what I'm saying? Again, I'm secondary. Think about it. You told Johnny, don't talk to me while I'm on the phone. And this actually happened, by the way. Don't talk to me while I'm on the phone. Something catches fire in the house. You're on the phone with one of your girlfriends, okay, or one of your guys talking about something. And you told Johnny, don't talk to me while I'm on the phone. He's trying to get your attention. Look, didn't I tell you? And then when you get off the phone, he's like, Mom, something's on fire. And then Mom says, well, why didn't you say something? There you have it, okay? I know a little boy who is going to have a problem, and I'll tell you what's happening to him now. This little boy, he gets off the bus. It's normally a female who picks him up, whether it's a cousin, aunt, or mom. His shoes are never tied. he probably doesn't know how to tie his shoes the best. Okay? Gets off, and the barrage starts. Why aren't your shoes tied up? Why do you have that stupid look on your face? You always look so silly. Come on, let's go. What's taking you so long? What do you think that boy is going to internalize as he gets bigger? That he doesn't know how to do anything right, okay? That he's a pain, okay? That people really don't want to deal with him. But he's also going to learn something about women. All women do is nag and complain, okay? Now, that's a shame-based idea. But I'm going to switch it, and I'm going to give you a shame-based idea that women throw off onto men. Men only think with their you-know-whats. That's a shame-based idea, okay? It really, really is. So I wanted to mention those things to you all because when we're out in the community and we're dealing with Muslims or non-Muslims, we have to be very, very conscious that a lot of the people we know have those particular experiences in their background. We have them in our background. We may not be cognizant of it. We still may be asleep. And that affects what kind of production we get from within the Muslim community and outside of the Muslim community. Okay? It's very huge. Remember when people used to say, know yourself, know thyself? There were books coming from pseudo-Islamic groups who said that. And a lot of us took it to mean, no, I'm a black man. No, I'm a black woman. But that's not really, really, really what the old scholars meant. Okay? Knowing yourself helps deal with some of this stuff. And I'll be talking about that later. But I don't want to give you too much. I just wanted to give you an introduction to toxic shame, multi-generational shame, because we're going to talk about some characters. We're going to see how their lives unfolded, and then we'll be able to make the correlation with our own lives and with other people we know. And then we start talking about how we can use aspects of Islam effectively to help deal with those particular situations. So again, I thank you for coming out and listening. I hope that it wasn't too much. It can be a lot of information. There's a lot of work that's been done on toxic shame, on multi-generational shame. My colleagues and mentors who are psychiatrists and stuff like that, they actually implore minorities, especially African Americans, people who were experiments in a diasporic event known as slavery, to go talk to someone, because it may have a lot to do with why we are in the condition that we are in. So again, thank you very much for coming out, and hopefully you'll come back. I'll have the video up for you to see it. If you want to share it with people, that's great. And if you have questions, I want to stop the video because I don't want your questions to be on there just out of your privacy, okay? And that'll be it. So